Hi, and welcome to another video taking an element of film and attaching The Last Jedi to the title, because this hasn't been done to death. Episode 8 is likely the most controversial Star Wars film to date for many reasons, the biggest amongst which probably being Luke Skywalker. Some people love him in The Last Jedi, some people hate him, there's really no gray area, you're either one way or the other. People will claim that the changes made to Luke's character make sense given what we know about him and what he's done, but with such a great divide in the fan base over his handling, something went wrong. And there's certainly a fundamental disagreement with how Luke was written amongst fans, Mark Hamill himself included in that.
When I read 8, I told Ryan, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything you've decided about my character.
But let's see if we can mend that as best we can. Then again, it's sort of like trying to put a bandage on a gaping wound. Anyway, whichever way you swing with how Luke was represented in The Last Jedi, the catalyst for that change was poorly executed. Otherwise, we might not have such a huge divide in whether or not Luke's character even makes sense, but others would argue that this change is broken on a fundamental level. Making Luke go from such a heroic and optimistic character to something so depressed, nihilistic, and apathetic...
Apathy is death.
...is a very radical shift in his character, so the point where he breaks off from being a hero and starts down this new path needs to be both clearly defined and convincing. Otherwise, the audience won't believe it, and like half of them didn't. The biggest problem with Luke's turning point is the execution from a filmmaking perspective. There's an age-old expression of show, don't tell, and that's not used here. That's not to say there's not some good in this scene, it's well shot and the idea of multiple perspectives is nice, but in the end, the most important moment for Luke Skywalker in this film is the writer telling us how to feel. How Luke feels. This pivotal moment is relegated to, for the large part, narration, rather than the expression of what's actually happening, what Luke is seeing.
He would bring destruction and pain and death at the end of everything I love because of what he will become.
Compare this to Yoda's vision in the Clone Wars Season 6. Yoda, upon going to the dark side cave on Dagobah, sees Order 66, the fall of the Jedi, what all that entails. We see what he sees, the death of everything he loves, how he reacts to it, the fear he feels, and the weakness. Now, Hamill's performance in this scene is great, but we, the audience, are very limited in how much sympathy we can feel for him because 1, he's acting like a fucking psychopath, and 2, we have no idea what he's actually witnessing. It isn't shown to us in a compelling way, it's just spouted exposition. He says that he saw darkness greater than he had ever imagined, and that Snoke had already turned Ben Solo. He talks about the destruction, and we hear lightsabers striking and screams. Luke talks about the destruction, the pain, the death of everything he loves. And that's what we're limited to. We don't actually witness it in the moment. Now, you could argue that we've already seen this vision just in real time with The Force Awakens. The problem with using The Force Awakens as that example is that it's not effective in the moment. A different film cannot convince the audience in the same way that integrating that horror can, especially when this horror is something that Luke has already witnessed. Starkiller Base? Seen it. Twice. Death of the Jedi and a Loved One? Seen it. So why is Luke's reaction so extreme, especially when Luke knows that visions of the future are only potential outcomes? Possibilities, neither guaranteed nor even probable in a lot of cases.
Han and Leia will die if I don't.
You don't know that. Even Yoda cannot see that fate.
This is what drove his father to the dark side. In his decade since Return of the Jedi, Luke hasn't figured out why his father became Darth Vader in canon. Like father, like son, I guess. Another issue with how this is presented is how Luke comes to his conclusion. This is a point where what we are told doesn't agree with what we're shown, and thus it becomes lost in translation. Luke justifies his response based on a brief moment of pure instinct, but what we're shown is Luke slowly raising his lightsaber and then activating it. He's considering killing Ben, rationalizing how he could stop this over time. This is not a brief moment of instinct nor impulse. Contrast this to Luke's fight with Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi. Rather than telling us through exposition the possible outcomes of a threatening vision, Vader makes a direct, very real threat. And Luke acts immediately. This is impulse. This is not. Vader is a very viable threat. Ben Solo is not. And this is later confirmed with Luke telling us that Ben Solo was frightened and that we're supposed to feel sympathy for him.
Last thing I saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him.
But then he murders an academy. Wow, this movie really isn't consistent. Continuing with the fight against Vader, Luke defeats him out of his anger and by acting on his impulse. But then he stops. He sees what he's done. What's wrong with acting on pure instinct and emotion. Luke's conflict with the dark side is his character arc in Return of the Jedi, and him rejecting it is its completion. So when Luke is placed into a similar situation with Kylo, it's no wonder the audience doesn't jive with Luke's retread and failure of what is essentially the same character arc, one that isn't even presented well. Imagine if Aang refused to use his firebending after he overcame his fear of it. Imagine if Gara gave himself over to the Sand Spirit after learning to control it. If Spider-Man rejected his powers at the end of Spider-Man 2 after learning how valuable and essential they really are. Imagine if Han Solo went back to being a smuggler after learning to care more about others and joining a larger cause. Oh. Recycling the same character arc but having the character fail this time is surprising. Yes, even realistic. But it's effectively a relapse, and it both undoes whatever growth the character has gone through in the film, and it makes the character's decisions frustrating. That's not to say that characters can't be frustrating. They can. Just not at the expense of their arc or the writing that's been previously established. Luke can fail. He is human. That is not a trait that The Last Jedi introduced to him. It did not humanize Luke. The dark side we fight in all of us is not a one-and-done struggle. Choosing the right path is something we do daily, and fighting off the darkness is something we fail at. But when you force a character to go through a similar arc to the last film he had a speaking role in, you're presenting the audience with a struggle we've already seen, and thus one that is less compelling. And the unfortunate thing is, when you fail to present the catalyst for this character's change well, the resulting arc crumbles. So, ironically, this acclaimed new and different idea isn't really that new and different, but sloppily repetitive. Compare this to Thor in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Thor's failure to save everyone is a result of his own selfish wants and desires to see Thanos suffer. His arrogance. We saw Thanos kill the Asgardians. We saw him personally strangle Loki, someone Thor loves as a brother despite everything he's done, while Thor watches. We see this. We witness it. We know what's going on in Thor's head without them having to tell us. And though it is largely played for laughs, Thor's resulting depression comes from a place we can understand because the catalyst was presented well. The same cannot be said for Luke. Luke's is just confusing. A forced way to get his character into a position where the director wanted him to be for the rest of the story because it was surprising. But bold and different isn't inherently a good thing. Bold and different is only a good thing when it doesn't come at the expense of the writing or the characters. Thank you all for watching. This has been my second video in a line of what I hope to be many. Fortunately, ranting about the sequel trilogy isn't all I can do, so expect some different, preferably more positive content in the future. I'm not really sure what direction I'm going to take this channel, but I am considering film reviews, more essays, and outlining some material from Star Wars that I actually do like. Which, at this point, may be surprising, but there is a lot, actually. So again, thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you. Always.